Hey Beth, how are you?
Good. It's good to see you.
You too.
You in New Orleans right now?
I am. Yeah, how about you?
Yeah, I'm here. Just moved into my
Awesome.
new place, so getting
Nice.
settled.
Very
Um,
good.
what have you been up to for the last 3 months?
Man, trying to figure stuff out, right? um, so I was talking with Greg and Darrian. I'm working with the jazz orchestra in town. So I have been writing a lot of grants, trying to help musicians find grants, making
Yep.
sure that there's funding available for future live performances and
Hmm.
then trying to figure out how to make it work in the meantime. That and learning new instruments. Decided to try and relearn the guitar and
Oh, nice.
badly learn the cello. But just having fun, trying to
Hmm.
be positive with the downtime. How about you?
So school ended like 3 months ago, and
Yeah.
I was actually kind of pumped because I had an opportunity to just go home and shed all day, or
Mm-hmm.
just like shed. Because when you have classes, it's like you have to shed at a certain time every day.
I
So,
remember.
so it actually was really good for the situation that I'm in. So I just kind of went home. Um, I have like a little practice space above my garage. I just like went up
Nice.
there. Um,
Nice.
did like Skype lessons with my professor, and then I just came back like a month ago. So that's kind
Nice.
of what I've been up to, is shedding, songwriting. I've been getting really into
Good.
songwriting.
I'm so glad to hear that. I know that we were checking out some of your stuff last summer, and I'm
That's
really glad to
right.
hear you're still writing.
Absolutely.
Good.
Um, I had a few kind of questions. I remember the you're an arranger, obviously. That's kind of like what your like niche is, or one
Yeah.
of them.
Yeah.
I was just kind of curious, like when you're arranging something or when you're just composing something,
Mhm.
like how do you like come up with like the initial idea? Like where does this spark come from? Is it like you sit down and you try to make the idea, or is it like you're like walking one day and you hear something in your head? Like what kind of like
Yeah. Um, so for arranging and composing, it's kind of two different ways. Usually for arranging, it's because I've been asked to do something by a client or, I've
Mhm.
been commissioned to do something. So for arranging, usually the first step is determine the purpose of the arrangement. So
Yeah.
is it for a client, or is it restricted in any way? Like, is it a specific ensemble? Is there a specific style that it has to be in? Does it feature a vocalist? What's that vocalist range? So I kind
Sure.
of the first step is for me always figuring out what the parameters are. For composing, yeah, that is kind of more of a um, some of it's a little bit more extemporaneous, just in the moment. I hear a melody, I write it down, I sing it in. I don't write it down, I sing it into my phone badly,
Yeah.
like on a piano. um,
Mhm.
but with arranging, yeah, it's usually more calculated. So I'm looking at a timeline, I'm looking at all the parameters, and then once I have the parameters determined, I kind of like to use those restrictions sort of as a way to be creative. So
Yeah.
if it's a big band, maybe I challenge the big band in like the way that the instrumentation is normally set up. So maybe I'll add some doubling if it's available, or if it's like I've arranged a bunch of like Nirvana, for example. I did a whole commission about Nirvana for a big band,
Oh
and that
darn.
was
Wow.
like, yeah, it was really cool, right?
Yeah.
But the concepts of like, okay, well, big bands don't normally play rock, so how do I make it so that it sounds great and use the restrictions sort of the instrumentation and the styles that they're used to playing.
Yeah.
So yeah, basically just exploring what the limitations are and then trying to figure out how to bend them from there. And then I write it down as a basic format. So I just take like the chorus is 8 bars and this
Yeah.
verse is 16 bars, and then they do a bridge that's an 8 bar buildup and something like that. So I just write down the whole form.
Mhm.
And then I figure out like, do I have to keep the form exactly, or can I bend it? Can I add a solo section? Can I add like a development section, things like that? And yeah, basically just figuring out what the main things are, and then figuring out how I can mess with them and still maintain integrity. But yeah.
Mhm. Hold on a sec. I'm on a
Yeah.
video call right now. Sorry. I'm in a public space.
No worries, you're good.
Um, no, man, that's like specifically like when like how do you like I know like like I can imagine like Beethoven arranging and he just hears all these harmonies and all these things. For you, is it like that or is it like more trial and error? Like how do
Oh,
you
yeah.
like when you're
So yeah,
yeah.
I think um whew, Beethoven's a heavy one, but I would never compare myself to him. But so I think what I can hear a lot of the time is melodies, and what I try and do is figure out if the harmonies that are in my head are just there because they're conventional and it's what I'm used to hearing. And then once I sort of have the idea of what I think was in my brain, then I try and stretch it. So like, does this have to be like this note that I'm singing in the melody? Does it have to be the 5? Like, can it be the 9? Can I
Yeah.
like change around that? So I typically do hear melodies first.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, all of the melodies that I hear have some sort of preconceived harmony under them naturally.
Yeah.
But I do try and make sure that I'm exploring like maybe this harmony that I'm hearing is just conventional, and based on what I've been listening to lately, maybe I need to try and stretch it a little bit. And then I'll apply more of like a theoretical concept to see if maybe there are other colors that could be explored that maybe wouldn't naturally be the first inclination, just so I can, kind of get
Yeah.
a little bit more creative, but still staying true to the concept of it. And sometimes you'll find out that maybe that's what your brain was hearing. It's just your ear's ability to sort of comprehend that is limited. So you kind of work to stretch both.
Yeah. I personally find that like when I'm like writing a song or I'm doing something, making harmony, my ear usually knows what's going to be the juiciest sound. I
Nice.
don't know if I don't know if that's like, because like I feel like sometimes we'll be reading through big band charts at Loyola, in the big band,
Uh-huh.
and like we'll play some chart and it's like a soli, and the harmonies are just like they're very interesting, but it's like too much. You know what I mean? It's like
Sure.
4 voices, like, and it's just like it's a little bit dissonant, and
Mm-hmm.
it's not as engaging as I'd want it to be. It
Mm-hmm.
feels a little bit too adventurous, if that makes sense. Like
Yeah.
how do you walk the line between like kind of like the nerdy side of harmony and like the juicy side, like for the
Yeah.
listener?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the rule that I always, always, always try and follow is do not trample style with intelligence.
Hmm.
To me, style is paramount.
Totally.
So if I'm writing in my own style, then great. I don't have limitations around what it necessarily is. Like I can express me, and that might be super nerdy at times, and that might be, super seemingly basic, or just really straightforward, but exactly what I want to say. But when I'm arranging, I make sure that if I'm doing like a Jelly Roll Morton commission, like
Yeah.
that, I'm staying true to the harmonies that he was playing. Um, I remember that was one of the first like major commissions that I did, where it was like writing music for a big band that was not big band music. And I really tried to put my intelligence all over those charts, and it didn't
Hmm.
work. I didn't really respect the fact that the harmonies that he was playing were exactly the right harmonies that I needed to be using. I didn't need to overcomplicate it and do substitutions and add a bunch of extensions that didn't need to be there,
For
just to
sure.
make myself feel like, well, I have a degree and I know what I'm writing.
Yeah.
you know? So that's ultimately, like, ego has to be put aside to be able to arrange authentically. And then also just looking at scores and listening to different scores or listening to different pieces of the timeline that you're arranging.
Hmm.
I ultimately think that, like, there is a time and a place for a really crunchy, awesome Thad Jones arrangement. But it doesn't necessarily need to be done on, like, everything. There's a
Yeah.
time
Yeah.
for it, for sure.
Awesome. I mean that's super helpful just to hear that, just to sort of like don't put your ego into it. That's such a good like philosophy for that. And I feel like it's just in general, it's cool that like it's really, you know, relax. I don't know. It's good to hear that you have a philosophy for that, you know, because I
Yeah,
feel
I mean
like,
it's hard to abide by because you want to make sure that whoever's reading your chart thinks it's the most killing thing ever, right? Because
of course,
impression, right? But ultimately, the impression is the music that's being heard. I think it is really important to make sure that you're not writing parts that are super like boring for the player. Obviously, we want to play
yeah,
music, enjoy it, but at the same time, like to overcomplicate something or to add a bunch of jazz for the sake of jazz is not necessarily good for the style, how it's being received, and then ultimately what the goal is for the commission in the first place.
totally. All right, so I'm just looking down my list of prepared questions.
Yeah, go for it.
Um,
I'm gonna grab some water.
you mentioned Nirvana, but just kind of segueing from that, you know, out of all your favorite non-jazz artists, who is your like, you know, the best artist in your opinion that's not a jazz artist that you listen to?
Yeah. So they sent me some of these questions to look at, right? And this was by far the hardest one for me to answer, Pef. Like, it's
Yeah.
very difficult for me. I actually had to ask some friends, it's like, who do you think my favorite artist is that isn't a jazz musician? Because I listen to lots of things that aren't jazz.
Mm-hmm.
But so I did some soul searching and I tried to figure it out. So I have one answer that might sound like a cop out, and so I have another answer just in case.
Oh, it's okay.
But the musician, and I wouldn't say that she's not a jazz musician, but I would say that calling her a jazz musician alone is too limiting. So
Mm-hmm.
my first inclination is to say Nina Simone.
Oh,
Um,
wow. Yeah,
she certainly plays jazz, but she also plays gospel and she played pop
absolutely.
music and lots of other things. And it might sound like a cop out because she really, to me, is definitely a jazz musician, but that wasn't really how I conceived of her when I first heard of her. And the reason that I really, really love Nina is because she comes from, like, she was singing some of the same songs that I sang in church, but like
Yeah,
way cooler. And she was also trained as a classical pianist, and that's kind of how I was trained
absolutely. Yeah.
too. So I hear some of those like Bach inspired lines that she plays over like basically popular music, and I just related to that so deeply. I was like, oh my gosh, like I hear this stuff too. So definitely, yeah, she was the first person that came to mind. But if we're going outside of the realm of any jazz
I
or
mean, I like that you're putting her in there because like I felt like the question was kind of a trick question. It's kind of snobby because it's like, what isn't jazz? What is jazz? I'm personally am not a
right.
fan of like because genres are just there so like us humans can organize them a little bit, you know. Like I
Yeah,
don't, you know, there's so many blurred lines, you know.
yeah, yeah,
But
definitely.
yeah. What was your second?
If we're going outside of the realm of, well, honestly, the first inclination that I had was I think you wrote non-jazz artist, and I was like, oh, okay, so this could be like Monet. Like I love Monet, but I was like, let me stick to musician and not go too out of the spectrum. So
Yeah.
outside of the realm of jazz and Black American music, I would say a musician that or a composer that's really influenced me is Ben Tchaikovsky. And really, what I
Oh,
found was
nice.
that the thread between Monet, Tchaikovsky, Nina Simone, some of my favorite authors, is that they're all really good storytellers. And I think
Yeah.
that's sort of the thing that draws me to all of them. I can hear stories so beautifully in their music, whether it's with lyrics or words or paint, brushstrokes, all of that stuff is really, really influenced by stories.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Yeah.
I feel like people, not just somebody, like I've had multiple conversations with some of my mentors and stuff, and like they've told me, you know, the highest level of music making is storytelling.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. I mean,
Yeah.
once you've mastered the craft enough to where you can tell the story the way that you want to tell it. I don't know,
Hmm.
like one of my favorite non-jazz artists is Kendrick Lamar, and like his
Yeah.
storytelling is super immaculate, and he takes like
Absolutely.
the stories of all, you know, of all the people that he grew up with, he also incorporates the music of people that he's working in the studio with, and I
Mhm.
consider like musical style to be kind of a story on its own, you know. So it's
Absolutely.
just, I don't know, there's just a lot of depth to storytelling and music that it's just like,
Yeah. Yeah, I think the pinnacle of any craft is being able to be a storyteller.
hmm
Because if you can tell a story with science, then people can relate to it, and then it becomes immediately relevant. You know, so
yeah,
it really kind of spans
and you can
so many
change the
different.
world with stories, you know.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
I feel like
exactly.
some of the protests and stuff, like
Mhm.
they're happening because of real events that took place that people have seen and are affected by, you know.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's, I mean, that's like nonfiction stories, you know, that's
right.
real stuff, but it's propelled people to take action.
Exactly, exactly. And it's stories that unfortunately a lot of people either ignore or have never heard before.
hmm
So the reception to something new, yeah, it's often because these stories are so compelling because they're real, people react to it really strongly. And I think that that truly is, yeah, the power of a good story for sure. I love that relationship that you drew there.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyway, I didn't mean to take away from Tchaikovsky. Tchaikovsky's great.
No.
We
You're
listened to him in
good.
class this semester. I took a Western history music class or whatever.
Yeah.
One of the hardest. We call it Wham, Western history, art, music.
I love that. Oh my god.
It's such a like
Wait.
it's onomatopoeia, you know. But
Yeah,
it
that's
really
really
feels
good.
like that because the work level is so much. But like we learn so like
Yeah.
we just go through all these Western composers. So
Right,
good to
right.
listen to Tchaikovsky for sure.
That's awesome. Yeah, for sure.
All right. My next question. So I kind of been talking about stuff that my mentors have said.
Mhm,
Um, what does I was kind of curious. As a mentor, if you're, you know, for, say example, you're teaching me, you're teaching another student.
mhm.
What does the process of mentorship mean for you as the mentor? And, you know, specifically, what do you gain from being a mentor?
Yeah. I think first of all, the transition from like being mentored to being a mentor is such a blurred line. Like, I don't know when it sort of started happening to me for me when I started being like more of a mentor, but what I realize every time I'm afforded the opportunity to help someone in that setting is that it forces me to figure out exactly what I believe and what the difference is between what I've been taught versus what I actually believe.
Absolutely.
Because I think sometimes I just sort of lean on regurgitating some of the same stuff I heard growing up just because it seems right. But really, when I have to analyze it and decide that I want to make it part of my narrative to share with someone else, I have
hmm
to really look and make sure that maybe that isn't right. Like maybe these old tropes that we're taught are not necessarily the truth. It's just been repeated. So I think the thing that's helped me a lot is it makes me have to essentially codify what I believe,
hmm
and that's a huge and important step in growth, and it changes all the time. I think a good mentor will recognize that maybe what they told someone last year might not be the right advice this year, or it might be
Absolutely.
the
Yeah.
wrong advice for a different student or different mentee. So it's just a lot of self-reflection, and then basically a trial to figure out, are these things that I repeat to myself or hold in my head or maybe have heard my whole life, are they true, or do I really need to do some analyzing before I start repeating them just to repeat them,
Yeah.
but it's a lot. I think I'm trying after growing up and sort of seeing how um, I benefited from having mentors. I think I can honestly say that I might benefit even more from being a mentor because I learned so much from
Totally.
that experience.
I feel like I can imagine that being a mentor also kind of keeps you in touch with another generation, another type of thinking. Like, because you're like, hey, like, I mean, especially with somebody that's older, you might say like, hey, you need to, you know, you need to transcribe this person, and this is how you're going to
Mm-hmm.
transcribe it. And then, you know,
Mm-hmm.
person's like, actually, like, I've been transcribing, but I've been doing it this way, and like there could be like a different perspective on it. Like I had,
Yeah.
personally, like I grew up with like kind of like more like, I don't know. So I listen to a lot of hip hop. I
Hmm.
might take the approach where I write lines, and instead of using like a scale, I use a sort of a rhythm or a meter to just kind of outline it, but a rhythm that's more in line with hip hop rather than like out of like some jazz rhythms book, you know.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, and I might have a professor that's like, hey, use this rhythms book, and I'm like, hey, I already have my own sort of chart, you know. Check
Hmm.
it out.
Hmm.
These are this is the flow of Biggie, and putting this
Hmm.
on but or just finding stuff from different places, you know. I feel like as a mentor you can learn stuff. Like I've sat down with mentors countless times. They're like, hey, like, you know, like you need to get out and like play like I have a guy that like he used to do a lot of gigs on Bourbon Street. He's like, man, you need to go learn Mustang Sally. And I'm like, I don't even know if they're playing that on Bourbon Street anymore. And they probably are in some places, but like, you know, you just have to keep
Yeah.
them in touch with like the right repertoire. And I'm like, actually, like right now everyone's playing like Bruno Mars and like all that stuff on Bourbon Street. And you know, there's a few songs that they're still playing, but some of those songs are just not playing anymore, man. He's like, oh really? You know?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's I don't know why I was really really ashamed when I was growing up that I really loved hip hop because it wasn't jazz, you know. That
Yeah,
was at least what the delineation that I was taught. It had nothing to do with it, right? And then as I grew older, you know, getting acquainted with different types of music and realizing that people deciding whether or not music is valid is often based in like racism. So
totally.
I had to really recognize that people really taught me or tried to show me what was good and what was bad versus, you know, what was appropriate, what was helpful, you know, what's like just trash music. A lot of that is really, really biased, awful perspective. So
Yeah,
I've tried to commit to making sure that I understand that all musics are valid and have a place. And
yeah.
whether or not I really connect to a certain type of music does not mean that its validation is any more or less.
Totally. And I was talking to an industry friend, and we were talking about hip hop, specifically,
Mm-hmm.
because I feel like each genre brings something new to the table, not just musically, but socially. I feel like looking back at what hip hop has done, I feel like it really gave the power of owning one's own music, in terms of like record deals
Mm-hmm.
and creative ability. Because I feel like before the 90s, before like people started really recording hip hop, when there was a lot, African American musicians were doing a lot of like R&B, funk, jazz, um but like the pop portion of that, like Motown and stuff, like those were, most of those people weren't really writing those songs. You know, they had
Mm-hmm.
songwriters, and you know, they were put on and they didn't get much of their royalties back,
Right. Yeah.
to the point where I feel like hip hop sort of came out of this place where people are like, you know what, I'm gonna own my freaking music.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I'm gonna write my own rhymes. There was this kind of tradition of like do it yourself, you know,
Mm-hmm.
DIY, which kind of translated over into the 2000s, where people like, you know, like Jay-Z, people like, you know, Kanye, just some of the cliche people that you know about, like, were
Mm-hmm.
able to own their own music and start their own record companies. And now I feel like today we're in this world where we have the internet, and a lot of people, you know, not just African American musicians, not just rappers, are like
Mm-hmm.
making their own music and owning it because they can, because there's this ability to do it, and because of the people before them. So I feel like it's important to like, the lesson from that is like, it's important to look at all genres and see what they contributed, not only musically but socially and
Yeah.
economically.
Yeah. Absolutely. There's so much value in understanding the history of where everything started because um, you know, music is not just some like art that doesn't reflect what's going on. You know, music is always something that immediately reflects the times.
Totally.
So to go back and study exactly where this is coming from, which I think is a huge part of a practice routine that people don't really mention, but like doing your research, learning the history, reading a lot about, you know, the people who we admire and a lot about
Yeah.
their lives and how they were, you know, how their lives were, that is so valuable to being able to relate it to your career and your personal views, and it really deepens your connection with the music. And I think that oftentimes it seems like, oh, it's what I did in college, I took jazz history, right? But
Yeah.
I think the best part about growing as a musician is really just connecting to these humans who play this beautiful music, because ultimately we are all experiencing the human condition, and how they responded to it might connect to you in a different way. So
Yeah.
there's absolutely validity in studying all forms of music, because you might find that spark, that thing that really gets you going, just by understanding where something's coming from and how it relates to what you're doing.
For sure. And I don't think, you know, I feel like a lot of musicians will say there's a right way and a wrong way in music. Like somebody would be like I have one mentor that's like, you don't want to play jazz, there's no money in jazz. And then I have another mentor that's like, you want to play jazz because it's like the greatest music ever, you know? Um, it's just
Yeah.
like, you know, there's just like weird reasons. And I'm like, you know what? It doesn't even matter what you guys think. Like, music is about yourself. So if you're enjoying the music, like you don't
Mm-hmm.
have to like every genre. You just have to, you know, it's just best to be mindful of it. But, you know, if I like to play jazz
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not concerned about like the economics, you know, if I'm cool like working a second job, or just not even that, like if, I mean, I'm not saying that specifically about jazz, but I mean like,
Yeah.
but like obviously jazz music is not the most profitable type of music, you know, it's very niche. But if I like to do it, if it makes me happy, then by all means I should be doing it. You know, if I like to play, you know, the music of Paul Desmond, you know,
Mm-hmm.
I should go for it. It's not wrong, you know. I shouldn't
No.
look down on somebody that likes to do that, nor should I look down on somebody that's like, you know, I don't like jazz. I'm gonna go to R&B. I'm gonna go to like EDM, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the point of the beneficial thing that I have gotten from studying jazz in college is that I was able to sort of drink from the fire hydrant, you know, like it was so much
Yeah.
information, and whatever I was able to retain and whatever I decided was super valuable to my future career, I had so much information at my disposal, because
Yeah.
I chose something that has so much depth and really takes a lot of work and a lot of focused study. So when I have because I was afforded to have all of that information at my fingertips, I could decide
Yeah.
what to do with it. Not necessarily that all of this information, if I retain all of it, it will make me the most money. What I did retain was how to be a person of integrity on my instrument,
Yeah.
and I learned a lot about the history and formation of Black American music that has shaped me to be the type of person and musician that I am today. So with that, you know, taking all of that information and then figuring out, you know, what type of um, life and legacy do I want to leave? That's ultimately what you can do with all of the, you know, do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that. You know, take it with a grain of salt. It feels like everything when you're in the moment, and that's all you're hearing. But when you're able to look back in a few years and know that you had so much opportunity to learn so many things, you can use those things in the ways that benefit your career, you know, as much as
Totally.
possible.
Yeah, jazz is, again, it's not just a genre to me. It's become this, it's a form of learning and education. It's very detailed and meticulous.
Yeah.
Form of music learning. You know, it's not just the genre. It's, you know, you go online and you see the guys that make like the soundtrack for like, you know, Nintendo and stuff. Like they're using all this jazz theory and harmony and all this language that they've learned. But
Yeah.
it's not necessarily jazz, but it's very detailed and it's very jazz educated.
Right. And also that has to do with how people have like institutionalized the learning of jazz. So, you know, the books that were shown and the patterns that were shown and the solos that we're taught to transcribe and the standards that we're supposed to learn, you know, all of it results in a debatably solid education.
Yeah.
But what it definitely result in is that it gives you a lot of information to deal with. So yeah, it just lets you apply information at will. So because that means, you know, you have it ready at your fingertips. So yeah, it's complicated. And I think, again, what I would have told somebody 4 years ago, right out of grad school, is different than what I would tell somebody today. And it
Yeah.
would by individual too, you know. So it really depends on the student and your goals.
Hmm. Yeah. Thanks for answering that. You know, I feel
Yeah.
like we started at mentorship and we wandered down the path. Um,
Oh,
I
yeah,
so I have
absolutely.
another question. It's been
Uh-huh.
kind of nagging. You know, it's been a question I've had for years and years. It's about practicing. It's,
Mhm.
you know, how long should I have a, you know, how long should I practice every day? Does it
Mhm.
even matter? Open-ended question.
Man, yeah, that sounds a lot like a question that comes from somebody having just graduated. I feel
Hmm.
that. I still feel that. So yes, it does matter, but not in the way that I think some people would think it does. The length of time matters because you need to respect your body and your mind.
Hmm.
Um, so if your body and your mind are ready for 15 minutes of practice, then that's exactly how much time you should practice. But if you're in a situation where you have your body and mind ready for a 4-hour session, then by all means, then that's where you need to be. So it
Yeah.
does matter, but not so much as like you need to do 30 minutes of scales and you need to do 30 minutes of patterns and you need to do a full transcription. You know, to me, those things, yes, you do need to kind of force yourself to eat your Wheaties every now and then to make sure that you're
Yeah.
growing. But I think what it breaks down to is you need to set aside time for, as you're becoming a professional musician, an economic practice session and a liberal practice session. So economic meaning like, I have a gig coming up, I need to learn these tunes, I have to shed these horn parts, that type of thing. So it's like,
Yeah.
all right, I have this set thing that I have to get done and I have to do it. You know, there's no getting out of it, that type of thing. So
Yeah.
set aside time for that economic practice so that you're on top of your stuff. And then set aside time for liberal practice, which it to me more includes things that are things that make you happy to play.
Hmm.
You have to be like um, really conscious about making yourself play things you enjoy, because if you don't force yourself to do that, you'll find yourself playing stuff that is getting you paid or playing stuff that, you know, is just required. So then you're not really playing the stuff that you really enjoy. If
Hmm.
those things happen to overlap in your career, that's amazing. That's the best situation, you know, where your economic practice time is exactly what you want to be practicing. But
Yeah.
I think, yeah, in the liberal sessions, you want to spend not necessarily a set amount of time, but enough time so that you can play something you really enjoy, play something that challenges you, and play something that you've never played before,
Yeah.
like sight reading, essentially. But those are things that I think make like a balanced diet of practice, and what will keep you from not wanting to return. So if you know that you have like a bunch of things that you have to just shed for this week, get them out of the way, and then schedule a time, set aside a time for a session that has nothing to do with all the stuff that you need to learn for that week's gigs, you know, things like that, that you can just play and enjoy, sort of uninhibited by the pressure of a deadline, you know, things like that.
Yeah. Um, so I guess what I'd also hope to get out of you was, you know, I've had professors that'd be like, if you're not practicing 5 hours a day like I was in college, there's something wrong with you, you know. Well, they don't really say it that way, but like
Yeah, no,
some
I've heard
people,
it.
you know, there's this, you know, people have very strong opinions about practicing. Um,
Yeah.
is it should I be putting aside a significant amount of time each day to practice my horn, or should it just be kind of like, oh, an hour today, 2 hours tomorrow, 3 hours the next day, like type of a thing? Is that
Yeah.
okay?
I think sort of like that pressure that we get from people about like, if you're not practicing 5 hours a day, blah blah blah, Coltrane shed this much, that it is really inspiring to some people, but it's also extremely harmful. And I think what people are doing by saying like, you need to practice this much time a day, is really they're just seeking validation for their own practices.
Yeah.
I mean, you can tell by how someone's career is going if their practice regimen is working.
Yeah.
So if somebody's practicing 5 hours a day and that's it, maybe they're professing jazz at a university. If that's what you want to do, then sure, follow that method. But I think what it comes down to is, what do you want to do? What
Mm-hmm.
does it take for you to get there successfully? And then additionally, what are the people who are doing what you're doing?
Yeah.
What are the people that are doing what you want to be doing? Like, I would hook up more with people on an individual basis and see what are the types of things that they're working on. That's very helpful. But yes, ultimately, I would say it's important to set aside time to practice every day, mostly because if you don't, it's going to go away. And there are lots
Yeah.
of times when you're not going to be able to use that time that you set aside because you have something important come up. And then if that's something important is a recording session, well, that's great because you set aside time yesterday to practice. So you're not already in the hole
Yeah.
trying together. And it's a physical thing. Our ability to play music is not just an art that's practiced sort of esoterically. We have a physical responsibility to play our instruments and have our muscles ready to play. I mean, I don't
Absolutely.
think you would expect a weightlifter to go a few weeks without weightlifting and then be like, you know what, I'm going to sign up for a competition tomorrow. That's not going to
No.
work. You got to make sure that all of this is together, or this, whatever.
Yeah.
That's all together. And then I think, yeah, that's super important, making sure your body is physically ready. But also, I think it has a lot to do with your mind too. To put yourself in the practice room when you're not mentally at all ready to practice, I think is just detrimental.
Yeah.
So you have a responsibility to ready your mind for practice.
Sure.
It's not always going to be
Totally.
fun. That's for sure. But you have to be able to make sure that you're doing your part to make sure that it is fun, because some of it is just you
Yeah.
practicing what you think you're obligated to practice instead of practicing what actually makes you happy. So definitely a balance, but I would never insist that someone practices 5 hours a day. And I would never say, no, it's fine, just practice when you feel like it. Like, you can get by.
No,
But I
no,
would
it's a
definitely say just be in touch with your person for sure.
yeah.
Make sure your mind and body are ready.
For me, it's a confidence thing. It's like, I
Mm-hmm.
usually set aside 3 hours every day to practice, and I'll
Mm-hmm.
feel good if I do it.
Sure.
Some days it might not happen. Some days it might just be 30 minutes.
Yeah.
I mean, the few days that it is just 30 minutes, but like it depends. If I don't feel good after that, if I'm like, you know what, I should have practiced, I'm like, well, tomorrow I'm going to do a lot more. And
Mm.
it gives me confidence to, because not, because some of the practicing is for staying in touch with the instrument, and some of it
Mm-hmm.
is like totally creative. Like I'm just writing like a written solo for a tune, or I'm writing a new
Sure.
tune, or I'm
Yeah.
singing a song. It's very goal. I do it and I want to see an immediate result, and I like seeing that immediate result versus the other practicing,
Yeah.
which is like scales and stuff and licks, and you
Mm-hmm.
don't always get the immediate result, but after time it comes. So
Sure.
I've been mixing the two.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that is definitely a valid way to practice. I would say just be careful to not get into the habit of punishing yourself, and it's something
Hmm.
I'm really, really acquainted with.
Yeah.
Anytime I'm making a mistake, it's immediately. I mean, it is to a certain degree. You messed up, but I would sort of make it as like, okay, well, I need to, punish myself for messing up, so I need to practice this more, and I need to be more careful. So then it became this like sort of toxic cycle of
Yeah.
a really, really unhealthy relationship with my horn. And I think like everybody kind of goes through that in college to a certain extent, but really you have to make sure that your relationship with your horn is something that is like happy and fruitful. And whether or not you hit your 3 hours a day does not mean that you have to punish yourself tomorrow for not
No.
hitting 3 hours, you know?
And well, I am very hard on myself, but I kind of like a little while ago learned that I was like, you know what, I shouldn't be punishing myself. But what I do enjoy doing is I'm like, well, I don't feel good about it today. So like, I'm always about improvement. So I'm like, well, if I didn't feel good about it today, tomorrow I'm going to try to accomplish some more musical goals and feel better about it, rather than
Sure.
tomorrow it's more of a positive. Like, I'm going to strive to continue to get better to improve this practice routine.
Yeah, yeah. And the other thing is, practicing doesn't always happen at your instrument.
Yeah.
Practicing very much to me is like, you can learn a lot away from your instrument. I mean, listening to me is practicing. If you're
Hmm.
listening and you're engaged,
Yeah.
reading about the history of the musicians, that's practicing. Hey, Darrian.
Hey guys, sorry.
Yeah.
That's
So
car.
there's so many things that are
Yeah.
not in your traditional sense of let me lock myself in my shed and practice, that are just as valuable, but may be more beneficial to where you are mentally or even physically. Like, you know, sometimes you're in a hotel room and you just can't practice. So really deeply checking out an album is an awesome way to practice.
Yeah.
Um, Transcribing something, you know, we can get more into that. It doesn't really happen at your horn, you know, it happens in your mind and sometimes away from that. So there's a lot of beautiful things that can happen without necessarily forcing yourself to be on your horn for 3 hours a day, but still be beneficial or even more beneficial in some way.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Cool, awesome. Well, Jacob, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm gonna interrupt and just ask a question here real quick.
Yeah.
So Emily, like, I know one of your specialties is arranging for the jazz orchestra. I was wondering, for the people watching or for young musicians who are interested in
Yeah.
beginning the journey into arranging, if you had maybe, actually, when I had to do my first big band chart, I remember calling you and I'm, what do I do? Like,
Yeah, I
and,
remember that.
and you had such amazing and practical advice to helping me get started on the process of like just kind of understanding what everything entails. So maybe if you have any advice for young musicians who are looking to arrange it, how to get into it and start that process.
Yeah, definitely. My arranging, I never technically like studied arranging. So I won't say that, like, you know, to be an arranger you have to be you know, have to study composition or anything like that. But I do really believe in the value of looking at scores. For me, my ear doesn't hear everything all at once, and even though it's getting better, I don't necessarily trust it all the time. So I think just spending a little bit of time checking out the scores of the music that you like, really valuable, because essentially what you can do if you spend a little bit of time is you start to decode what that arranger's sort of like cipher is. You're going to notice like all of the patterns that they use, and they're going to reuse them over and over and over again. I know this because I do it. Um, but lots of arrangers do that too. So studying scores is a really great way to start. And then figuring out like what type of arranging do you like, just by checking out different recordings. But honestly, the reason that I love arranging so much and the way my brain just sort of gravitated to it is because it's just a puzzle with finite pieces. So once you decide how many pieces you're going to put into that, whether that's one of the pieces is a sax soli, and then you can break it down further, like how many pieces are your sax voicings in that soli, you can determine how complicated it gets and then figure out exactly, you know, what works within the parameters like we were talking about at the beginning. So stylistically, what is the most appropriate voicing for this sax section? And that's going to take some research and that's going to take some time. But also, you know, if you're in the setting where you don't necessarily have to adhere to a specific style and you get to explore your own, I think the most freeing part about being an arranger was learning that every single note is always an option. It's just figuring out if that's going to be the best option for the type of thing that you're working on. And whether it's the decision of you putting, you know, your own sound on it, or you emulating a certain style, it all kind of comes down to just spending some time with it. I think the arranging books that I read were sort of helpful, but mostly it was just practice, like just, you know, deciding to put myself in situations where I was forced to arrange. So if there's a gig coming up where they're like, you know, it would be really cool to play some version of, trying to think of something that I was working on. Some version of a Doja Cat song on this next gig, right? Wow, wild, cool, let's do it. And then you put yourself in the position to be like, yeah, I'll do it. Let me do this arrangement. Like, I would love to do this arrangement. And then really just putting yourself out there, because you're going to fall flat a bunch of times on these on these arrangement experiments that you're doing. But ultimately what it's going to do is help you figure it out. Sibelius and finale are not going to sound like the humans. So you're going to get over that learning curve eventually. And you're going to learn that the piano does not sound like a brass section. So yeah, it's just really just put yourself in positions to arrange. It's a labor of love at first, but once you start really honing the skill, it's an extremely valuable skill. And honestly, especially dealing with the shoulder injury where I couldn't perform last year, was a really valuable source of income for me, because I wasn't performing as much. So I was able to arrange a lot more and, you know, set myself up for success in my career in a different way. So super valuable. Just get over the learning curve, and it really does pay off.
Hey, Emily. Wait,
Yeah.
I have a question. Sorry, guys.
Yeah.
Where are you going? Where are you going, Darrian?
Executive decision and cut the video off, because we've got a pregnant wife in the car. There's no way we're not doing that on video. Be safe.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. I'm curious, just for Pef and some other people, especially people who don't like to practice. Are there, like, you know, you've taken other jobs outside of playing and arranging,
Yeah.
and I think especially in the time of COVID, that's important. That's an important thing to think about.
Mm-hmm.
What made you do that? You know, you did that early on. Like you explored some other things outside of playing to make money, to kind of, you know, supplement your playing, I'm assuming.
Sure.
How did you come to find what those things were, and how can someone like Pep take advantage of that when there aren't that many live playing opportunities?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say the reason that I sort of transitioned into doing things that weren't necessarily me performing music on my horn or arranging, which translated sort of into being into the nonprofit world. I was in college and I love my university, but I kept seeing how there were some administrators in place that were doing they were just repeating some really, really messed up patterns. And it was affecting the people who were my professors. They were affecting people who were like my fellow students. And I saw that because people in administrative positions were really messing up the opportunities for my friends who are beautiful artists, I decided that I wanted to be that bridge. And that because of my skill set and because of my interest and my passion for it, that is the right move for me. So I used my post-undergrad work to study how to organize and be an effective administrator that helps remove some of these barriers, because ultimately the barrier between money and sometimes art is administration. And I really could not stand like some of the heinous practices that I saw. So the reason that I decided to get a little bit on a sidetrack from music was because I could not stand to see all these beautiful people doing amazing work and not getting what they deserve for it. So all that being said, I would encourage Pef, if you have anything that is inspiring or that you're passionate about that is not necessarily the same thing as playing your horn, that would be what you go into to either supplement your income or to leave the legacy that you want to leave, right?
For sure.
Ultimately, yes, it does sometimes. wind up supplementing my income. It's not the easiest industry to be in.
Yeah.
But if you can successfully participate in one of the things that you're really interested in or not necessarily playing your horn, and do so in a way that doesn't detract from your artistic goals, that's the ultimate situation to try and set yourself up with. But with that being said, it does take a sacrifice. You're not going to necessarily be in the same position as you would be if you were just doing this. But ultimately, right now I can definitely say financially and in terms of the goals that I have for myself, it's set me up nicely right now. It's not the cushiest alternate career that I could have chosen, but what it does is it makes it so that I get to wake up and know that I'm making a difference and I get to do what I love. But it's a challenge. You have to work really hard. I worked myself a little bit too hard to the point that it was unhealthy, and had to figure out how to make sure that there was actual balance in my life, because I just decided that 2 careers meant no sleep, and that doesn't work. So yeah, it's a delicate balance, but I promise that it pays off, and it certainly is a huge benefit right now. The nonprofit industry and the art industry is suffering too, but we are organized and have more infrastructure to support us. So yeah, it can help. It's tough, but it absolutely can help. And I definitely encourage people to do it, and would be more than happy to help people who are trying to explore 2 career paths at the same time figure out how to maintain balance and health, because that is a big part of it.
That's awesome. Yeah, without your health, that's it. Once your health goes, everything else goes after that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to, first of all, thank Emily. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you guys so much for having me.
Such a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks, Pev.
Thank you, Pat.
Thank you,
for
Peffer.
the
So good to
opportunity,
see you guys.
Yeah, good.
So, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who are watching online, again, you're watching Pokemon Arts Collective, and we're doing, again, a virtual masterclass series this year due to the COVID-19 realities. And if you have enjoyed the programming, we do ask that you use the donate button on our Facebook page to donate to our organization. And we hope to continue providing free programming for music education, and also for to provide greater awareness of the music industry for our young next generation of musicians. Tomorrow we'll have our final masterclass, and we have one of our other combo teachers, Scott Johnson. And yeah, so thank you, Emily. Thank you, Pef. Thank you, Darrian. And we'll see you guys tomorrow.
Thank you,
Thanks, guys.
Later, y'all.
Later, Darrian. Later, guys.
Bye.